What did you think when they brought it back to Bryant-Denny Stadium?
I thought that was great.
Yeah.
Yeah, I like the campus settings, whether it's Tuscaloosa, whether it's Auburn, whether it's you name it. I don't care. I like the campus settings. I thought it was wonderful. But yes, the only thing I didn't like, but I understood it, I love the 50-50 split. That was just a neat atmosphere where half the building was orange and blue, half the building was crimson and white.
Beat Everyone is brought to you by Broadway Joe's Fantasy Sports, inspired by football legend Joe Namath. Embrace the thrill of daily fantasy sports like never before in a new app coming soon. Welcome to Beat Everyone. I'm Ben Flanagan with AL.com. I'm here with AL.com Alabama football writer Michael Casagrande, and we're back with another edition of the Golden Age with the legend Eli Gold.
Gentlemen, how are you?
You've got to find some. We'll let him know what he thinks.
Yeah, well, on that note, it's time to talk Iron Bowl, Eli.
I've heard of them.
Yeah, for sure.
Yes.
Listen, I would say arguably the greatest college football rivalry, but honestly, I think we all feel a certain way about this game. We've covered it for literally decades, especially you, and I just wanted to ask, first off, when you hear those two words, Iron Bowl, what springs to mind?
Oh, gosh. I think you've already said it, the top rivalry in all of college football. And I say that because I have been blessed over the years to have broadcast Michigan State. I've done USC, UCLA. I've done other big rivals. And nowhere does the state hinge on a game like does the state of Alabama and the Iron Bowl. I just have not seen that anywhere else. When I was up, Bama had an off week early November, and I would always find another game to do, a national broadcast, and I've done a couple of Michigan State games. Both happen to be at East Lansing, but that's neither here nor there. But you look at the newspapers, page one was, the Red Wings, and you had the Pistons, and you had leftover stuff from the Tigers, and you had this, that. You have to go to page 6, and Michigan State this weekend. It's nowhere is it like it is here in the state of Alabama, where everybody just hangs on that game's outcome every November.
I'll say it for you here, Eli, because I feel like you're sugarcoating it a little bit. All those other rivalry games absolutely suck compared to the Iron Bowl. Like, no matter what anybody says.
Well,
like,
I can't say that they suck, but they don't seem to have the import that it does here. And maybe that's just a comment on the state of Alabama. We don't have an NHL or a Major League Baseball or an NBA team to deflect the attention. When I was doing USC, UCLA, again, the same thing. You had Dodgers, you had Angels, you had all of the other stuff. We don't have that. Those teams competing for column inches and for airtime and so on. So maybe it's just the way our state is, but who cares? It's a great rivalry.
So do you remember your first one? What are your memories of your first Iron Bowl?
Not much, to be honest with you. It goes back so long. I just remember the impact of the series. Mm-hmm. But the first ones were at Legion Field, obviously. I do remember the 50-50 split in the attendance, and that was big time. But I do vaguely remember having never seen anything like that rivalry. Even in New York growing up, a Yankee Mets series, once they came about, didn't have the same impact. Nothing did, but I can't necessarily tell you I remember exactly that first one.
Was the Iron Bowl or Alabama and Auburn? I mean, we've talked a little bit about like your awareness of Alabama prior to taking the job, but was the Iron Bowl on your radar at all before you got to Alabama?
No.
Okay.
No, in New York, it didn't get any coverage. Mm-hmm. As we talked on a previous episode, college football, in the New York Times, the New York Post, the Daily News, Newsday. It would be in agate print, that little teensy-weensy print, and it would be a small little paragraph, Dateline Birmingham, Alabama beat Auburn, Auburn beat Alabama, whatever it is, and such and such ran for 2 touchdowns and such threw for 300 yards. That was it. It got no more play up there than did Marshall and West Virginia. So no, I wasn't aware of it.
When did it first start to hit you? This is different, right? Like culturally, you mentioned like how important the rivalry was. The stakes are always so high, and you can't necessarily remember like the first game specifically, but when did you start to realize, wow, this rivalry is the real thing?
When I got to Alabama, I realized, again, I had come down to broadcast hockey. Didn't know much about college ball at all, and probably, to be honest, cared very little. I was a pro sports fan when I moved here back in the late 70s. I didn't know anything about college ball. I used to have to ask people, well, what's not the Iron Bowl, but, well, everybody's excited about LSU playing Ole Miss. Oh, who cares? But I learned, obviously, as I've stayed here over the years, I learned, and of course, people just went nuts with the Iron Bowl. And when I was hosting Calling All Sports, I realized that, you needed to talk about it because that's what the fans wanted to talk about. Although, as I also mentioned on a previous visit with you guys, there was that one year where on a Monday night of Iron Bowl week, Tommy Lasorda and Sparky Anderson were in town. And somebody made those men available to me on my talk show. And I did that show with Tommy Lasorda and Sparky, and it was spectacular. Not because of me, just because of the guests. I let them go. But, I didn't care. I wasn't going to pass on those guys, even if it was Iron Bowl week. And, of course, I got a lot of negative feedback about that. How are you going to talk baseball on Iron Bowl week? Of course, again, the luxury I had is there was no other talk show in town or in the state. So you didn't like it? Tough. There's no, I was going to say, go dial up the other show. Well, there is no other show. Exactly. So sit down and hush up. That's how it was back in those days. But no, I came to realize the importance very, very quickly.
So we both have family roots in the Northeast. How would you describe, when you would talk to family back home, how would you describe the Iron Bowl for the uninitiated?
I didn't, because at that point, my mother, rest her soul, she wouldn't know if a football was blown up or stuffed. So having a conversation with her about football was pointless, and everybody else was gone. I had no brothers or sisters. I was an only child. My dad was deceased. I had nobody to talk to up in New York, so it never really came up. But I would have explained, that it was, like it was the Yankees and the Mets playing for the World Series, probably the closest comparison I probably could have made in those days.
Yeah, fair enough.
Yeah.
What was it like calling an Iron Bowl, or any game, I guess, but Iron Bowl specifically in Legion Field? You mentioned that venue, and a lot of people who are aware of Alabama football now and the rivalry now, they have no clue that they used to play in that stadium. But what do you remember about Legion Field?
I remember that it was not up to par. It was not, it was a great ballpark. The history, of the old gray lady is spectacular, but it was not. I would travel to other venues, and I knew that Legion Field was lagging, and you knew that you're going to have to take time and figure out why the scoreboard wasn't working and stuff like that. But also, on the positive side, walking in and hearing the voice of Simpson Pepper on the public address system and so on, it made for, and having seen that stadium on television, because in those days, again, folks, remember, there was no internet, there was no ESPN.
No podcasts.
No podcast, no nothing. So what you saw on Saturdays were Keith Jackson and, whomever the color man was with him, Frank Broyles, what have you, from Legion Field in Birmingham. It was big. I mean, when the game came from Legion Field, it was a big, big event. So, I remember being there and how important it was and how it felt, but it was not, it was not a great facility as far as the creature comforts were concerned. But boy, did it carry with it a ton of history, no doubt about it.
What did you think when they brought it back to Bryant-Denny Stadium?
I thought that was great.
Yeah.
Yeah, I like the campus settings, whether it's Tuscaloosa, whether it's Auburn, whether it's you name it, I don't care. I like the campus settings. Plus those stadia, Jordan-Hare and Bryant-Denny, were newer. They had been upgraded, updated, what have you, and things worked very well. So, I thought it was wonderful. But yes, the only thing I didn't like, but I understood it, I loved the 50-50 split. That was just a neat atmosphere where half the building was orange and blue, half the building was crimson and white. But no, other than that, going to the campuses, I thought was wonderful. And of course, I think I've told this story before. I had been to Auburn many times, but for basketball. And here I am now going to do the first Iron Bowl at Jordan-Hare. And I was dear friends with Jim Fife, the voice of the Auburn Tigers. And Jim and Rose lived in Montgomery. Well, Alabama, the team, stayed in Montgomery on Friday nights before the Iron Bowl at Auburn. Still do. And Jim said to me, he said, why don't you just ride to the game with me? He said, ride with me. He said, you can ride back with Tom Stipe or whomever, but you could ride with me. I said, that'd be very nice, because I didn't know the traffic flow or any of that stuff. I had a parking pass that was, halfway to Victory Land, as opposed to being close to the stadium. But Jim had the good spot, as he should have, right up against the stadium. So we drove together. And people would look in the car as we were driving, and they'd see the two of us together on the interstate. Then we get to the stadium and we get out of the car, and people just couldn't believe what they were seeing. Eli and Jim getting out of the same car, bitter rivals, if you will. Not that Jim and I were rivals; we were dear friends, but they couldn't quite understand the Alabama and Auburn broadcasters riding together. It was a funny reaction, and the game went on, of course, and we all know how it's turned out. But I like being on campus. I think, one time we had a problem, though. It was me and Snake, and there was an accident in Auburn. I forget what road it was, I don't remember, but there was an accident. And the clock is itching ever closer. We spend a lot of time, we get there really early, everywhere we go, really early, specifically to avoid a problem. Well, we're sitting and we're sitting and we're sitting. And then we start moving maybe 2 miles an hour. It was awful. And you could see the stadium, but it was a way off. And I was not partial to walking. I'm not a strong walker. And Snake was not, because he had the bad hips and the bad knees. But we finally had no choice. We had to get out and walk to Jordan-Hare. Well, we're about a mile away yet. And so I flipped the keys to somebody in the back seat, and I said, here's the parking pass. You go, we'll see you somewhere afterwards, and we'll find out where our car is parked. It was, I think it was Butch's wife, Brenda, who took the keys, if I'm not mistaken. And we all got out and walked. And the comments that Snake and I got walking that last mile to Jordan Hare was classic. Fans were respectful, very respectful, but they took the advantage of giving us a little couple of little zags, zings, and what have you as we went. So yeah, we had a great time, but I liked it being on campus. I really did.
So you kind of, that Jim Pipe story was great because it kind of killed my next question. It was like, what was the best street fight you guys ever had with the Auburn radio crew? There was there was never any rivalry between.
No, none.
Even just for fun.
No, we just. I hate to disappoint you.
Yeah, I was trying to get a good
I don't like the mutual respect here, Eli.
Do you not?
No, not very. We're talking rivalry.
You just see the beat writers when the beat writers get together. It is just like a street fight, and
it's like West Side Story.
Yeah,
really.
Yeah, less singing. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, no, we are the Jets. Yeah. The Jets
none of that. Well, what about the fans? Like, I know for a fact, Alabama fans have always felt a certain way about the Auburn broadcast, right? They get a kick out of hearing losing calls, right? They obviously.
You've heard this.
Yeah, I secondhand, right? Have you ever heard it from the fan base? You're mentioning like it's in jest, right? But like, have you ever heard like what's the temperature from the Auburn fan base throughout the years?
You know, you're going to hate this, but it's the truth. I walked even after the kick six. And we parked.
What happened?
After the kick six, we walked. Our car was parked a ways off. We were parked on Wire Road and some intersection there, past the old Coliseum. I mean, we had a healthy walk. And again, I don't walk very fast, so I was just there walking. There were others with us, but the people were respectful. They were thrilled. But did anybody run up into my face and give me crap? No. Did anybody do anything like that? No. You lost, so on. Yeah, we lost. It happens. But I never got into any near fights. People were respectful. They know that Eli wasn't out there playing. They were happy to be able to give me a little crap, but in a respectful way. So I know I'm disappointing you.
Well, your kick six experience was a lot different than mine. I'll just say mine was a lot different.
Really?
Not as much mutual respect. No.
And I was walking with a.
Well, no, I'd rather not.
I was wearing crimson and white.
Right.
I mean, there was no question who I was
right.
and what have you, but people just looked at me and didn't say a word, or they were just respectful without getting in my face. And I don't know, maybe because I was older.
Yeah.
But whatever it was, I've really never had that kind of a problem.
Yeah, it was a hellscape that night, Eli.
Really?
That's what I saw outside of Jordan Hare. First time I ever saw a game inside Jordan Hare Stadium.
Really?
First and last, yeah.
That was probably, so you were the reason.
Wow. Yeah, it was me. Yeah, it was my fault. Yeah. Listen, I think we've probably reached the limit of times we should talk about the kick six on this podcast. So, yeah, it's probably time to take a break. You're listening and watching Beat Everyone with Eli Gold and Michael Casagrande and Ben Flanagan. We'll be right back. We're back on Beat Everyone. I'm Ben Flanagan. This is Michael Casagrande. We're here with Eli Gold. We're talking Iron Bowl. And Eli, what's the best Iron Bowl you've ever called?
Whew. Any one that Alabama won was the best. But I would have to say last year will always live in my mind because it turned out to be my final game as the voice of the Crimson Tide. I didn't know it at the time, but the big play to clinch it, that turned out to be my final call for Bama. So that one was very, very special. Obviously, the John Mechie overtime 2-point conversion catch, that was very, very special. We mentioned earlier in the series the throw into the end zone to win at Auburn. For Alabama, the Upchurch catch, that was very, very special. So there have been many, but I guess if I had to say one, it'll be this most recent one, simply because it's the last one I've done.
It seems like so many of interesting ones, good, bad, ugly, whatever, it seemed to happen in Auburn. It seems like the most memorable one. I mean, there were a few, at least in my tenure, 2014 was a 55-44. That was a wild shootout.
Sure.
But it seems like all the crazy stuff happens in Auburn. Am I right?
Well, it seems to be. You're right. I've noticed that over the years, but you just never know. You never know. But yes, there have been some very unusual games. I always accuse Auburn of having a lucky horseshoe stuck somewhere, but it always seemed that those games at Auburn were hold on, you never know what's going to happen.
Even when Alabama went, like you said, last year, 2 years ago, or 3 years ago, there's rarely a boring game in that stadium. I don't know if I've seen many.
Yeah, and of course, before me, you had the Van Tiffen kick at Legion Field, the 52-yarder that Paul Kennedy and John and Doug Layton called. So that was very, very special, though, again, I wasn't on the microphone for that one.
Absolutely. I do think about that 2014 game like one of the best shootouts in Iron Bowl history, where you've got Blake Sims, I think, throwing 3 interceptions in that game, 2 or 3 interceptions in that game, and lighting the place on fire with Amari Cooper just going deep, and Nick Marshall on the other end of that. I love those shootout games. 2019 obviously was one where Mac Jones was replacing Tua, and Bo Nix has a great game, and they're just going back and forth, and Waddle goes crazy. I mean, does it matter what type of game it is with the Iron Bowl? Like, do you like calling shootouts more? Do you like defensive struggles?
I personally like blowouts.
Yeah, for sure.
Because it's easy, especially when you're on the correct end of the blowout. You can tell stories, you can relax, you're not all wound up and, got yourself all occupied. You're just sitting back, kind of like the Notre Dame championship game. That one was over early. So if I had a choice, I'd take an I told you so slap down and be done with it. But you don't always get what you ask for. So the games have just always, the Iron Bowl, any game that has, I think I told you this earlier in the season, any game that has a name is, whether it's the Iron Bowl, whether it's, the Red River rivalry, whatever it is, if it's mayhem, I don't care what it is, any game that has a rivalry is just that much more important, and folks everywhere know it.
There's this Twitter user named Ascot Friday, who's a big Alabama fan, and I want to read you the way that he has described the Iron Bowl and how it affects his mental health as an Alabama fan. He hates the Iron Bowl, like even when Alabama wins. So here's what he says: as this rivalry goes, they get all the fun. We're miserable if we lose. We're relieved if we win. It's hard for me to remember being euphoric after the Iron Bowl was over. There's 1 or 2 examples, but that's where we top out. It's just being relieved after the game that we survived it and we get to go on to the real goals of the season. They have a different take on the rivalry altogether. It's much more centered around that result, and we're just trying to survive and get it over with. I never look forward to this game.
Interesting.
Condescending.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, everybody looks at things differently. I understand that, but it's I don't like it when Alabama would lose. I don't like that when I was on the air. But life goes on. Life goes on. But I didn't ever get into the philosophical analysis that he did.
That's pretty deep. Glad you shared that with us.
Yeah.
I'm sure we could get some Auburn response to that. Maybe that could balance it out, but no. Interesting.
And so other than Gravedigger, I mean, is there another call of yours from the Iron Bowl that really stands out?
I thought the Mechie call for the win was good. I was on top of that, and I knew exactly, who was in the end zone. I had that one diagnosed and covered well. So that one was good. There have been others over the years, sure, but those are the 2 of the most recent that come to mind.
I was just say that game, that 21 game that ended by Mechie in whatever the 4th over, that may have been one of the worst games of football. To watch.
Yeah.
And the ending was exciting.
Sure.
It was an overtime walk off, but. Just a horrible game. I mean, it was low scoring. It wasn't even like an offensive struggle. It was just like a mess of a game. Was it hard to call that game?
Not terribly. The thing that I remember, again, is that the winning play was at our end of the field. Going back to a previous episode, remember at Auburn, we broadcast from in the end zone, as opposed to Gravedigger, which was 160 yards away from where I was sitting. The Mechie conversion was at our end of the field. So it was easy to see, easy to call. You were able to really keep an eye on everybody making their blocks and what have you. So that one to me was fairly easy.
Would you have had any reason to have interactions or relationships with any of the Auburn head coaches? Like, did you ever come across Tommy Tuberville, ever come across Gene Chizik or anything like that?
Tommy Tuberville I've met a few times, and we talked on a pregame show. I've met Coach Bowden, Terry Bowden over the years. But no, I've never met Coach Chizik. I did have interestingly, Gus Malzahn was one of the nicest people when I got sick. I might have mentioned this on the show a number of weeks ago. I got a text message when it became public that I was in the hospital and I was not doing well. I got a text message from this number, and he said, it said, "Eli, this is Gus Malzahn," and he wrote some very, very nice thoughts, and I'm wondering who the heck is this, and he wouldn't have my number and what have you. So I called some folks at Auburn, and I said, "Do you recognize this number?" And they said, "Yeah, that's Gus's cell phone." And he actually took the time to check with me, see how I was doing, a couple of times, and I reciprocated that. His wife had been ill, and his daughter, whatever, they had some problems. I checked with him. We were human beings, man. We were caring about another human being. What color you wore didn't matter. He was so wonderful to me as far as taking the time out of his schedule to be concerned about the broadcaster for the other team in the state. And we had met once, maybe twice. We didn't have a relationship per se. That really impressed me. That showed me what kind of a guy Gus Malzahn is.
We can all just get along, right? Because at the end of the day, it's just a game, it's just a sport, right?
You can say that laughingly. I genuinely believe that. I believe that. Life's too short. Life is too short to be an idiot. That's for me. That's to me.
Well, you said it really close to Michael, though.
I was leaning in his direction.
Yeah, but, sometimes it's fun to be an idiot, but, other times I get it. No,
I
see what you're saying.
I think you've proven with many episodes now that it's more than a game, right? Like, there's more to life, and there's obviously more to sports in a lot of ways. And you see examples of it all the time when teams bring in a child who might have an illness and give them a moment, or there are players who are going through struggles in their families and they are able to tell stories like that. So football is just kind of a platform to get to know people and understand
You have a platform to do good.
Right.
Why not do good?
Right.
Why be a jerk?
Yeah.
And that's just, and I don't know. I'm sure there are people out there who don't like me, and that's fine. But it's not because I've been a jerk to them. I just won't do it.
Well, to close, Eli, just looking at the Iron Bowls that you've called throughout your broadcasting career, we go back and forth between Alabama and Auburn. I think the current streak that Alabama is on, which is 4 wins, is the first time in many, many years, right? I don't think it had ever happened in your career calling Alabama. So this rivalry is as competitive and as heated as it gets. And so looking back, you've been a huge part of it and a huge part of fans' experience watching the Iron Bowl. Yep. What does that mean to you as a broadcaster?
Again, I've been lucky to be in a position to convey the game. That's what I look at. I've been lucky. I know the listenership on Iron Bowl Saturday is through the roof. As big as the numbers are to listen to during the regular season, that final regular season game, it even is higher. And I'm not, I don't take that lightly. I never did. I was thrilled to be able to do it. And, I hope people enjoyed what I heard. And obviously when Bama won, they enjoyed it more than when they didn't win. But I just went and did my job, did the best I could. And I know that doesn't answer it the way you want me to necessarily, but I never forget the importance of that game. I never have forgotten the importance, and I just work hard at bringing it to everybody as best I can.
I mean, I think it's the best rivalry in sports. I really do, and I think in many ways because of what you brought to the experience, including obviously your last year at Alabama.
Yeah, that was quite. Again, I don't know if I would have done anything differently had I known it was my last game, other than I would have signed off by thanking everybody profusely. But obviously I wasn't told at that point that was my swan song, and that's, so it is. But I wouldn't have done the call any differently. That was a magnificent way to wrap it up with that Gravedigger play.
You nailed it, Eli. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
If you have a question for Eli, please leave us a voicemail, 205-523-4809. You can find Beat Everyone wherever you get your podcasts, YouTube, Spotify, Apple, wherever. For Michael Casagrande and Eli Gold, I'm Ben Flanagan. Thank you so much. Beat Everyone is brought to you by Broadway Joe's Fantasy Sports, inspired by football legend Joe Namath. Embrace the thrill of daily fantasy sports like never before in a new app coming soon.